You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week, we witness the conjuring of a nun and the creation of Annabelle. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number in between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I am Adam Thomas, and I am a random ghost that doesn't tie into anything, but we're going to make a franchise.
And I am Thomas Mariani, and I am a nun who also believes that dinosaurs existed, so I'm progressive.
Wow. Good for you. Very proud of you.
Yep, I also rap, and I skateboard.
Ooh. Wow.
You could say this nun's having a bit of fun.
Keep on acting up, sister. Right? Is that what we're going for?
Secretly, this is Sister Act 3, this is the reboot. Whoopi Goldberg's gonna come and she's like, I'm here to talk to you about the nun initiative.
Yeah, Sister Act 3. The devil made me do it. Okay,
But welcome everyone to the Double-Edged Double Bill, where if you don't know, every week Adam and I cover a good and a bad feature related to whatever topic we're doing that is, picked at the end of the previous episode, and we decided, in honor of The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, which is coming out this week, we're releasing this, we decided to go to the Conjuring franchise, which is interesting in that I would say it's probably the most predominant horror franchise right now. In fact, I did some reading. It is apparently the second highest grossing horror franchise of all time.
Really?
Yeah, because the total gross of all those movies is about $2 billion.
Wow. That's crazy.
Do you know what number 1 is?
Paranormal Activity, isn't it?
No, those movies didn't gross over $2 billion. Even though, I heard this, and I was a bit tangential about, is it technically a horror franchise? I guess it is. I'm not sure. Godzilla is what they're claiming.
That's a reach, but I'll give it.
Yeah.
I'll let them have it.
That's true. Yeah, but we're not talking about any of that. We're talking about The Conjuring, which started in 2013 with the first film, The Conjuring, and was the brainchild of James Wan. And it's very interesting given it's sort of like what he's known for now, but is one of many steps to his sort of modern superhero kind of stuff with Aquaman. It's interesting given he started with Saw, then moved to Insidious, and then we got The Conjuring. I would argue there's a lot of really good entries in this franchise, along with some fair bad ones. How would you say it especially stacks up to other horror franchises of recent?
I don't know. It's weird to me to call it such a huge, sort of franchise, because I wouldn't personally call the MCU a franchise. I would call, the 3 Captain America movies, that franchise, Iron Man franchise. Yes, they're all part of a shared universe. That's kind of how I feel about The Conjuring as a whole. I just think of the 3 Conjuring movies as their own thing, and then the Annabelle movies, well, maybe not the 3rd Annabelle movie, because it's pretty heavily to do with the Warrens, but...
I would argue that those individual things are a series within a larger franchise, because franchise isn't exclusive to films anyway. I would argue the MCU franchise, you get, TV shows and stuff as well that are added into that.
You just can't help but tell me how it is, and that's why I appreciate it.
Well, actually...
No, but as far as how it stacks up to, really, what can you compare it to other than, the Paranormal Activities and stuff like that? There's not really much competition out there right now. As far as that goes, then I think there's more sort of solid effort in the Conjuring universe than there has been in any of the others.
I would say definitely of recent, there isn't a huge amount of competition, but I would also say, I think, in terms of even cinematic horror in general, I would say what I think really makes the Conjuring one stick out so much is they're massive, huge, crowd pleaser franchises that aren't just horror restricted, horror fan restricted. And it's one of the few where it's not just monster focus. You'll get like Annabelle's, like you mentioned, or some of these other things. But The Conjuring itself, and especially we should talk about, since neither of the two movies feature the Warrens, who are sort of the main characters of the franchise. It's interesting with that, especially considering we might as well address it. The whole, hey, this is technically based on true people because the Warrens, Lorraine and Ed, were real paranormal investigators of sorts. I think we can firmly state that I think the both of us think those two IRL were kind of huckster, con artist pieces of shit.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
For me, like, I can totally 100% believe that because I'm not someone who believes in at least like the paranormal that they put out there. I think they really tricked a lot of people into thinking they were, some kind of experts or whatever. But at the same time, I kind of love the Warrens as characters in the Conjuring movies, mainly on the strength of Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson, who are so great together. Like, they're such a lovely, like, couple, and especially once they get a bit more familiar with, like, their kid, or even some of the, the families they try and help out. I feel so warm and like I'm a part of it, almost just like, can you all adopt me? I know I'm a grown-ass man and you're from the 70s, but please adopt me. Ed and Lorraine.
No, I completely agree. Completely agree. I fucking love Ed and Lorraine in as far as the Conjuring universe, for sure. I kind of went through and rewatched most of them in prep for this, which I typically don't do. But I decided to do it this time. They steal scenes, man. I mean, they just chew it up, and they're supposed to. They're the leads, but it's just, they're fantastic together.
They're a great emotional grounding for all this crazy jump scary stuff to happen. And I'll say also, I think the big thing that helped me with the Conjuring franchise is it kind of made me love jump scares again. Because considering, like, the history of horror in particular, like, in the early part of this millennium, in the 2000s, like, I got so tired of bad jump scares. They were just so omnipresent and so, like, poorly put together that I was just like, man, maybe jump scares are just a bad thing in general. And then James Wan comes in and it's like, no, it can actually be fun. And it can be well executed. And you can also still have fun character stuff. When you use it too much, like any trope, it ends up becoming very stale and boring and like, oh my god, what the hell? As opposed to, these movies feel like really great sort of haunted house explorations. And it helps, it's like you're kind of going into that haunted house with a couple of experts along the way who aren't like, oh, we're a couple of like teenagers out in the middle of the woods trying to make out. It's like, no, we're like expert paranormal investigators or whatever trying to stop demons and ghosts and shit.
Yeah, they go in there wanting to see this shit.
Yep.
They go in there to happen. like, come on out, motherfucker. Like, yeah, they're balls to the wall. No, I definitely agree, to the point to where, I was watching our good feature, and it's chocked full of good jump scares. It truly is. But then there's just little subtle moments too that they do in all of the movies. Just something in the background that you can just barely make out, or something like that just adds to it too. I mean, you're 100% right. He sort of perfected what I think is the modern day jump scare, where it's there for a reason. It's not just like, woo, boogity boogity, there's a cat jumping on a table. It's genuinely unnerving and keeps you on the edge of the seat the whole time.
No, yeah, and of course that ended up sprouting off not just a second Conjuring film with those two, but various spin-offs, which I agree, it's become sort of a cinematic universe. And I will say, of the various cinematic universes that have attempted to sprout out in recent years post-Marvel, I would argue, not necessarily quality-wise, but at least like continuity-wise, that Conjuring at least manages to hold together somewhat with its weird timeline.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's probably the most successful other than Marvel, for that reason alone, because there is still sort of an easy line, easy sort of story point to navigate and follow. Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah, though I'm very curious to see as things go along, because we're covering two of the spin-offs tonight, since at the end of our last episode, I had the two bad picks, you had the two good picks, so we ended up with my bad pick of The Nun, the 2018 film, and then your good pick, which was Annabelle Creation, the second Annabelle film, which is also interesting. We picked the two prequels that are the first stops on the Conjuring timeline.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think of that. Yeah. That's true.
That's true. So
look at us.
We're seeing the origins. This is just called the Conjuring Origins episode.
God, I hope that movie doesn't happen. It will, now that you said it.
Oh, maybe that's true. Where they have young... They'll just get Tysa again. to be young, to be young Vera Farmiga, which we might as well get into. Let's go ahead and start off with The Nun.
I had a series of visions when I was younger. And after each one ended, the same thought would be stuck in my head.
What did you see?
I saw a nun. Word of my visions reached the church, and I was asked to accompany a priest to an abbey in Romania.
The Abbey has a long history.
Valak.
Not all good.
What?
Finley him down. Callahan's here.
So The Nun came out September 7, 2018, and is, as of yet, the first in the timeline for the Conjuring franchise, which, we're going in chronological order of the films in that way, because we'll talk about Annabelle Creation after this. And also, it is the highest grossing of any of them at $365.6 million, and also the lowest rated, because it has like a 28% on Rotten Tomatoes, 41 on Metacritic, and even CinemaScore, which, if you don't know, is the thing where basically during the initial sort of preview screenings, I'll ask people who come out, like, what did you think of it? What would you give it on a grade scale? And audiences gave it a C, which for, like, audiences, that's dire. That's really bad for, like, a CinemaScore. Because they'll usually, like, most things get like, oh yeah, it's like an A-, B+, it's pretty good. That's pretty bad, all things considered. And I recently went through all the Conjuring movies and hadn't seen this one in the theater because I avoided it. And yeah, I'm glad I at least did before, but I couldn't escape it, Adam, because I watched it now, and it's pretty fucking bad.
Yeah, I don't like even the look or feel of the film. It's boring. That's always a problem if you have a horror film that's just a fucking bore to get through. And it's not a bore like, some people would equate to like slow burn or mumblecore movies or whatever they call them. This is it's a snooze fest, man.
The movie's definitely twiddling its thumbs to get to an eventual point.
Oh, 100%. And when you get to the point, you don't care.
Yeah.
I just don't care.
Yeah, because we should mention, interesting fact, both our movies are at least mainly written by the same person, Gary Dauberman, though James Wan has a story by credit for this, and apparently did some of the reshoot stuff, particularly during the exteriors, which I will say, one of the few compliments I can give this movie, that castle they got in Romania, for where, like, the actual abbey is, I think looks great.
Yeah, them shits is haunted. There's no not looking at that one. No, there's ghosts here.
Right, yeah, and I like that look, and I like the best sequences all that are in this movie. The few good ones, I would argue, take place outside, particularly in the graveyard, as opposed to most of the time we spend in this movie is with Taissa Farmiga, who we should mention, obviously, sister of Vera, who plays the Lorraine Warren role in the main movies. No actual relation in the series. Like, this nun is not at all related to the Lorraine Warren character. But she is this nun who, or she's a nun in training. She hasn't quite gotten her wings, as it were. She hasn't taken her vows and all that. But she is tasked to go with a priest played by Damien Bashir, as Father Burke, over to this mysterious castle where there's a abbey, and it's been said that a couple of nuns have been killed, as discovered by our Frenchie, who is the local guy in Romania, played by Jonas Bauclet, I believe is his name. Sorry if I mispronounced that. But yeah, and from there they go inside the house, and the nun is there, which we should mention. The nun had previously appeared in The Conjuring 2, and in fact, this spin-off was announced a mere 5 days after The Conjuring 2 made a shit ton of money its opening weekend. And you can tell it kind of feels like we have to just make a nun movie, as opposed to we have a cool story for a nun movie.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And they were really high on the nun as a character too. I mean, even in our good feature, there's a moment with a picture, and then even the mid-credit sequence. And I think it's kind of a boring antagonist. I really do. I didn't like the look of the character in The Conjuring 2. I like it even less in this movie. I don't fucking care. You know, I hate to say it that way, but I think it's a weak character to sort of try to build a whole film around. I mean, especially when in its first appearance, you get the wrap up.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting. We should mention the big thing about the nun is that the nun is the name is Valak of the demon, and the nun visage was actually completely done in reshoots. There is a bunch of like stills you can see of the original Valak demon that was shot for the original part of Conjuring 2, which is like this big demon, kind of looked like an alien queen, basically, from what I could see from the photos. And they decided, no, we have to do something different, and they came up with the nun, which is, I guess, a simple stopgap kind of solution. And I like particularly the sequence where the nun shows up in The Conjuring 2 in the Warren's house. I think is like the best sequence with the nun. But also kind of shows you the actual limitations of like, oh, well, what else can you do with the nun? I mean, she can just like walk around a house. In this case, a castle.
Yeah, she can look super slow. She moves super, super slow. And it's like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't find it scary. I don't find it even really unnerving. I mean, sometimes when it's a long shot, you can see her in the very background, and all you can make out is the white. Like, okay, that's kind of eerie, but no discredit to Bonnie Aarons. I mean, she's doing the damn thing.
Yeah, Bonnie Aarons, who is the performer, who was also, people might not know, she's been in a bunch of like different like suit and makeup roles. Particularly, my favorite being she was the creature behind the dumpster in Mulholland Drive, which is still like one of the creepiest sequences in any movies when she scares the shit out of the dude behind the Denny's dumpster.
It's so good.
Yeah,
for sure. But yeah, no discredit to her. I mean, she's doing what she's supposed to be doing. It's just there's not much to do. Walk slow, extend your hand, walk slow. Sometimes growl with a bloody mouth. Cool, done.
Right.
And the thing is, too, even the story that's happening, especially with the Demian Bichir character, like, I don't care. I do like him, but unfortunately, this is just his thing now, where he'll pop up in these random-ass movies and play the same character in every single one of them. See the Grudge remake or reboot or whatever you want to call it. Nobody has anything to do in this movie. No one.
Not even Taissa Farmiga, who I think is very talented. I don't think it's just a nepotism thing
for
that
sure.
got her this role. I've liked her on like American Horror Story and other things. But this is a very clear like indicator that she can't just be like stuffed out into the hallway like, and look like you're terrified. The director here is Corin Hardy, who had previously only directed a movie called The Hollow, which I had seen and do not remember much of. Just it was like this Irish movie.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's all right. It's like a good first feature where I'm like, okay, maybe this guy could do like a decent like horror thing after this. And they just plug him in and be like, hey, kind of do what James does. And this movie is a great example to show of like, okay, you can sometimes do that. This franchise has tried this a lot where it's like, hey, let's get a up and coming horror director to make something within this franchise. And we'll have two examples. This is the bad one. And the next one definitely is the good one of like, let's give a budding filmmaker a chance with like a decent amount of studio money. And I think with this movie, it shows like, especially Corin Hardy, God bless him, can't fucking light a hallway correctly for this movie. Where like so much of the indoor stuff is so dark. Like I can see more of what's going on when they go outside in the graveyard than I can indoors. And I've watched through with like lights on, with lights off, and like I've put up the brightness of my fucking TV or my computer, wherever the fuck I'm watching it. It's like I can barely see what the fuck is happening in any of these sequences inside, where it's just except people are like coming down a hallway and they got a fucking lantern or whatever, and it's just I don't care about what's going on. You can't even show me it. I shouldn't care that much about it.
No, I completely agree. And it because of the way it's shot, because of the way it's lit, because of the way it's filmed, it almost makes the story even kind of hard to follow, which is not even a complicated story, but you find, like you said, if you can't even see it, you don't care about what's happening. So, like, honestly, I don't even really understand what the hell the point of this movie is, like what happens, other than to A, make the Nun movie, and B, do weird reshoots where the guy that they're performing the exorcism on in the videos from the Conjuring other movies is the Frenchie character. Other than that, I don't see a point.
I think it's just to exploit the nun as a character, which even James Wan in The Conjuring 2, were like, oh my god, did you see down the hallway and you see the nun? And what's creepy about the nun is that she's in the middle of this 70s looking house with the wallpaper and shit.
And it's brightly lit.
Right, and you just see a fucking creepy nun down the fucking hallway. That's terrifying. As opposed to a lady is like got a lantern in the middle of an abbey and there's a nun with no face at the end or whatever. Like, that's not, and you can barely see what the fuck's happening. Who cares?
That scene, especially in The Conjuring 2, in the bright lit, middle of the day, 70s Art Deco fucking house. Yeah, it's terrifying because it's so out of place and just so, like, it would be jarring. Like, what the fuck is this thing here? Where in this, like you said, the setting of the castle, it does look great. The outside scenes in the graveyard, great. This character should fit into this universe perfectly, and yet, in a way, it feels even more out of place to me. Because there's just no stakes. I feel like that's the problem with this. I don't feel any stakes. Like, even with the main characters, that's fine. Like, say, hypothetically, the main characters all die or whatever. I mean, that's terrible. But ultimately, you know what the ending is for the nun character, so why am I don't care. Well, I don't care.
Right, and even then, with, like, the characters that we do see, the strength of the first two Conjurings really is that, like, you, like I said, believe in the family of the Warrens, this fictional version of them. And you also care about the families they're helping, particularly in the first one, like, the Ron Livingston, Lily Taylor family, I am so endeared to. Because it's just, like, they are, like, this is their last kind of ditch effort to have, like, a big family home, and they really love each other, but they go back and forth with each other in a way that feels believably like a family. Like, that's the stuff you're really interested in. Even in some of these spin-offs, the better ones tend to emphasize, like, okay, you do actually have to give a shit about the actual group of people you're following. They're getting haunted. You can't just do whatever bullshit like a worse horror movie would do, like The Nun would do, where, like, you have... There's, like, the Thais Farmiga character who I kind of referenced earlier was like, oh, she's this nun who, like, is progressive and believes in, like, dinosaurs, and also that the Bible isn't exactly as true as it, you know, tends to be, which is weird because, like, that's just like, oh, that's a sensible thing. And then is the movie kind of teaching her, like, no, you should believe, like, the Bible or whatever exactly note for note?
Yes.
Because there's a nun demon?
That's exactly what they're saying. And that's kind of been not only my problem with this movie, but my problem with a lot of the Conjuring films, specifically sort of the spin-offs, is to where it relies too heavily, at least in my opinion, on sort of the church and faith being the answer. Not faith as in just having faith in something, having faith in the church is going to be the answer to solve these problems. It just feels easy to me.
Yeah.
In order to have that sort of be the be-all, end-all ghost killer.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. It also just, like, really questions any kind of skepticism to some degree in a way that feels really weird. Where, like, other ghost movies can be, like, vague about, like, oh, you know what, maybe the church isn't exactly right, but there is some other realm. But they take a more, like, agnostic approach that I think is more healthy for, like, a haunted house kind of thing. As opposed to this, it's very much just like, oh, you must believe that we put a demon here in the middle of, like, the Crusades, and we're able to block them off by having the blood of Christ in an amulet, which, for the record, they fucking ripped off from Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight. How dare you rip off a cinematic classic like Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight?
Mm-hmm.
There's, like, I didn't see William Sadler walking around anywhere with that fucking thing. I would have loved it. But anyway, back to a bad movie. I will say, one of the sequences I did like, and I think I'm very convinced this was a James Wan segment, was the bit where Damien Bashir is going out to the graveyard and he sees a little boy that he had seen previously, which I'm not a big fan of that whole backstory thing, but that causes him to, like, go into the grave, and the way that's all shot, I think, is the best sequence of the whole movie, and I'm convinced it's a James Wan's bit. Because, like, he goes into the grave, and you see him, like, fall into the grave. He's like, oh, God, I'm, like, trapped inside a coffin. And then the camera zooms up, and it shows the gravestone, and then pulls back, and it's like, oh, my God, he's actually buried underneath. That's such a cool, stylistic way of showing that kind of thing off, where I'm like, oh, this is, like, a fun bit. And then we'll go back inside. I'm like, no, I don't care about Taser Farmiga, like, praying with a bunch of nuns who turn out to be, like, not there, I guess? Like, they're ghosts or something?
Yeah, something. I don't know.
And then the nun ends up in like water. It's like she's in some jacuzzi that's like underneath or whatever.
Yeah, pretty much. You just gave away the entire fucking like nobody needs to watch the movie now.
Good. I'm doing a service.
Right, that's the only shit of note that happens in this movie.
It's a real bummer, especially because, like, I think this is the...
It's frustrating.
Well, no, it's really frustrating because I am kind of worried about, like, oh, are they going to just spin off things to death? Because Annabelle has had 3 movies. There's The Nun, there was La Llorona, which, for the record, barely has anything to do with Conjuring. Like, the only connection is the character from the first Annabelle, the priest, pops up again. But that's about it. Like, I don't know how many other things, despite having that treasure trove and, like, they're in the house, all the different artifacts that they could spin off into other movies. I don't know how many more you could really make into a movie. Like, there's even ghosts I really love. Like, I think my favorite part of The Conjuring 2 is The Crooked Man.
Well, aren't they making that movie?
They've been saying that forever. I think they announced that not too long after The Nun they were doing that. And there's been no forward momentum on a Crooked Man movie
as
since.
far as I know, the only ones on the book right now, other than obviously Conjuring 3, which is done, but The Nun 2 and The Crooked Man, I believe, are the next 2 that they're talking about making.
Which I think they're pushing their luck with how much this was reviled by audiences and critics.
Yeah,
with
everyone. Like you said, a C rating just goes to show that, it was mediocre. That's what the audience thought. It's all right. That's not good.
No.
That's not good. No good.
No good.
It's a terrible film.
Yeah, especially with, like, I mentioned the jump scare thing. This movie does a pretty poor job of that, even with, like, there's a great example of a good jump scare we'll get to in our second feature that I think really does a great job of subverting expectations, as opposed to this one does, like, the laziest version of that, where there's a point where Tisa Farmiga, like I said, walking down the hallway, like she does in 90% of the things in this movie, and there's a nun with no face behind her, and she's like, oh, is there someone behind me? As she's turning around, another nun comes from the left and pins her to, like, the fucking wall. That's not scary, that's just startling.
Right. I agree. Well, that's what I was getting at earlier when I said, the cat jumps on the table, boom, loud noise. It's a cheap jump scare. And I just never have respected that tactic. Like, if it's literally just a loud noise to make someone jump out of their seat, then you're not scaring me. You're startling me. I completely agree.
Right, it's more of a screamer thing you would get in, like, an email, as opposed to...
Right.
Like, yeah.
God.
And what's even worse is, like, this movie wants to play it both ways, unlike, I think, a lot of the other Conjuring movies, where they try and keep, like, hey, we're in period, either in the 70s or in the 60s or whatever. We're keeping in period even with the style of things. Everyone's kind of treating this as seriously as they can. This movie has the weird thing where it's a 50-set movie, but also they do, like, 80s action one-liners, like, particularly the Frenchie character at the end, where the nun says, like, you should have stopped before, Frenchman. And he's like, I'm French-Canadian. Does some bullshit. Like, that's, like, what are you doing? What tone are you going for with this movie?
I completely agree. It wants to be a gothic horror, yet with shitty jump scares and, like you said, awful one-liners and horribly boring backstory.
Though I will say, honestly, I don't think it is the worst of the Conjuring franchise.
I have to agree with you. At first, I thought it was, until I remembered the first Annabelle. I'm like, oh no, that was easily the worst.
Because the first Annabelle is so boring, but also it's so blandly shot throughout all of it, as opposed to, like, you can see everything in Annabelle to its credit, but also it's just dull. It doesn't even look that 60s period as much. It looks like, this was like the off day for the Mad Men crew, where it's like, what do you have? A couple of suits and dresses, for people to wear, but that's about it.
Yep, pretty much. I agree with that 100%.
I guess we should go into final thoughts then, Adam, on The Nun, and also, where do you possibly see, like, what other things could they do with spin-offs that could work for you with, like, the Conjuring movies, and maybe even a specific monster? That might work for a spin-off.
To talk about The Nun first, it's frustratingly bland and boring, and it shouldn't be. There's a lot of good elements that they had at their disposal that they just fucking cocked it all up and just gave you a really bland, basic attempt at a horror film. It is not the worst. Annabelle's easily the worst, but I expected Annabelle to be bad, the first one. This I kind of had hopes for, just because of the look in the trailers and everything, but it didn't do anything to make me care about the characters or the titular sort of villain at all, to the point where I don't at all need a second one. And as far as the spin-off characters, like, yeah, I think the Crooked Man could be a cool one. I did dig the idea of the Ferryman in the Annabelle 3. Not necessarily look, but they gave it enough backstory to where they could maybe build something out of that one, and you could go really back in like the past with it. But other than those two, that's about it. I'm not big on the samurai one. We've talked about this as far as the other monster, but a fucking werewolf has no place in these films.
Yes, and Annabelle comes home, if you don't know, a random Leo werewolf shows up as one of the artifacts.
Giant werewolf that looks like fucking Hugh Jackman as a werewolf in Van Helsing. It's atrocious.
And it's so weird and out of place in this franchise.
I mean, too much. Too much. But, it's... My thing is, I wouldn't mind them just keep doing the Conjuring films. And then you can introduce all sorts of new characters, but still have it tied, where you don't have to do spinoffs. Each one of the villains could have a movie set in the Conjuring universe with Ed and Lorraine. And I think, to me, that would be the way to go forward, instead of doing these one-offs with characters you don't give a shit about.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that. I think, particularly with, you mentioned the Ferryman, which, if you don't know, was this guy that also showed up in Annabelle Comes Home, one of many, because the whole premise of that movie is like, all of their things come out of the room and they're set free, ooh, it's spooky. And he's this guy who, you have to put coins on his eyes in order to, accept a soul and shit like that. That guy was pretty cool, but I would agree, I would rather him not have, a spin-off with whoever the fuck, as opposed to him just have a movie where he faces off against the Warrens. I would agree, where I think be a more interesting movie. Because, even, with the other ghosts, one of my favorite ghosts in any of these movies is the old man in The Conjuring 2. I think is one of just my favorite examples of one. Bill Wilkins, yes.
Bill Wilkins. Terrifying.
Right, who is just, he's an old dude, but what's so great is, what you necessarily don't see, and how, particularly the sequence in Conjuring 2, where, it's Patrick Wilson interviewing him, and you see in the background as he materializes in that chair, is such a fucking great bit in that movie, and so terrifying. And you're also, trying to help out with, the Warrens and this family. That makes it a lot more interesting, as opposed to in The Nun, where it's a nun who's not quite a nun, and a French guy, and a priest, who are pretty thin as characters. It results in, a pretty dull, boring horror movie, which is, not even fun to kind of make fun of, because you're just sitting there I was just walking down a hallway. Oh, another hallway. Interesting.
Yeah.
Oof. Look, different angle on that hallway. Yeah, and also, I think it's just a thing of, I think Catholic imagery and nuns in particular are so played out. I just don't care. Really.
I don't
much.
care.
Even with Valak the Nun, who was really great in Conjuring 2, but that's really all you need to see of her, because the nun is bad. So we should go into our good feature, but first, here's a promo for an ESO show you can queue up right after ours.
Or conjure it up.
Hey everyone, this is George Tripsis, co-host from the Metal Geeks podcast, along with Carrie the Metal Geek and Brutal Dave. Our show is where we bring the metal geek culture and heavy metal culture and mash it into the geek culture. Come listen to our show where we talk about movies, comic books, Disney stuff, and mostly about movies where I'm always right and Carrie's never right. Check us out at metalgeeks.net. You can catch us on all your earhole listening podcast devices.
I'm Carrie the Metal Geek, and I approve this message.
And now let's get into Annabelle Creation.
Ed and Lorraine Warren met her in 1971. But her story began long before then. On August 11th,
I found this doll.
That doll was hidden away.
witness the creation of evil. Annabelle Creation, rated R.
So Annabelle Creation is the second film in the Annabelle sort of mini-series within the overall Conjuring Universe franchise of sorts. As we were kind of mentioned earlier, the first Annabelle came out in 2014 and was spun off mainly based on just how successful the Annabelle doll was in the first Conjuring, who was not as much of an entity. She shows up in a prologue and then one scene with the daughter character. But that doll made a pretty big impression despite all that. And what are your feelings on the doll in the first Conjuring and Annabelle, before we even get into any of that? Do you think that she's a worthy horror icon?
To be fully transparent, I never liked the look of it. I thought, as soon as I saw it, I'm like, well, of course this thing's fucking evil. Like, there's no question looking at it. But that type of shit really scares people, really bothers people, dolls in general, and especially in the way she's dressed in sort of like old school Victorian garb. Like, I get it. It totally makes sense to me why this one sort of exists, why this would be the first spinoff. Like, I completely get it. And to be fair, the scene in The Conjuring, in the first one, where they're describing what's been happening with the doll, is pretty chilling shit, dude, with the red crayon and writing all over. It's pretty creepy, dude. So I get it.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that there's the weird problem of, like, in reality, IRL, quote unquote, that the actual Warrens said, once again, mileage may vary, and by vary, I mean, it's bullshit. They said that the cursed doll was this Raggedy Ann doll.
Raggedy Ann.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is perfect because, like, oh, it's unassuming Raggedy Ann doll that's, like, so iconic for being just like, oh, it's a cute, like, plush doll that your kids sleep with, ends up being evil. But then The Conjuring, they're like, okay, we can't use Raggedy Ann for, like, copyright reasons, but how about we make a doll that looks so scary from the start where, like, any child would be like, no, daddy, no, I don't want that. Please keep that away from me.
Yeah, you're right. These teenage kids or college kids, they move into the house and find it. That fucker's gone. Like, it's gone. In the trash.
But I think it worked, at least in the first Conjuring, because it wasn't, like, our main antagonist of sorts. And hence the problem when you make a spin-off about it. And the weird thing is, in the first Annabelle, they make it like, oh, Annabelle is like a conduit for a demon to come to our world. Which is kind of, in the execution of that, lame. Because, like, this demon shows up and it's just kind of carrying the Annabelle doll around. And it's like, what the fuck? Why would this doll even have that kind of an attachment? Well, they answered that in this prequel that takes place in the early 60s and is about basically this orphanage that's run by Sister Charlotte, played by Stephanie Sigmund. They have to, like, they've lost their original orphanage, so they're moving into this nice childless couple's home, the Mullins, played by Anthony LaPaglia and Miranda Otto, who have lost a child, as we see in a prologue. But before he sort of gave it up, Samuel was a toy maker, and he made dolls, including the Annabelle doll. And as things are revealed with especially little orphan girls that are living there and start discovering some things inside the house, there's some creepy connotations to the titular Annabelle doll. And Adam, you said you hadn't seen this one before.
Correct. I stayed away from both this and the third one because of how terrible the first one was. So yeah, I was like, on a couple recommendations, and then you said it was all right. That's why I sort of made it one of the options for the show, and I watched it last night, followed by the third. And out of all of the Conjuring spinoffs, possibly even Conjuring 2, this is my favorite.
Interesting.
Annabelle Creation.
All right. Well, I would generally agree. I think it's one of the better ones, but go ahead a bit more into why you think it's one of the better ones in particular.
Dude, it's a fucking white knuckle, oh, what the fuck is happening movie within the first 3 minutes. The opening sort of gut punch they give you is so tragic and awful and graphic, even though they don't show anything, you just hear it. And it cuts away right before the impact, and you're like, oh, fuck me. And this is the perfect example of, like what I said earlier, where there's scenes where you know a jump scare is coming, but then right in the background, if you just look close enough, you can see shit happening. In particular, when the little girl finds Annabelle under the stairs, and if you just look up, you can see the demon's eyes. Like, just fucking standing there. But that scene alone, I was like, holy fuck. And that happens quite a few times in this movie, to where if right in front of your face, they're showing you just either this demon or something else that's in the room that's going to happen. But it's done so well because you're just focused on either the fucking doll, or you're so, like, just preparing yourself for a jump scare you know is coming that you don't even notice it. And yet, if it wasn't there, it would not be as scary. Like, this movie is a prime example of the classic saying, and it's a pun, and I don't mean it to be, but the devil's in the details in this movie, man. There's so much going on, and it's so fucking scary, and just nonstop, unrelenting, like, punishment and evil is happening to these people in this house, and it is so good. And the kid actors are fantastic.
Yeah, particularly, like, I would say Lulu Wilson, who this was not too long after she'd been in Ouija Origin of Evil the previous year.
Yeah, right. Holy shit.
Right.
Yeah, right.
She was really coming up at this time as like a cute little like horror child actress. And I think it's a big credit to, we should mention the director, is a guy named David F. Sandberg, who before this had done a movie called Lights Out, which I think is a very poorly written movie that's wonderfully directed. It's such a conflicting thing. It's like, wow, this is a really cool director. I wish he had gotten a better script that wasn't just full of fucking stupid bullshit. And then later on would go on to direct Shazam, which I think you can see a lot of the hallmarks from here that would later benefit him in Shazam. Particularly, he's very good with like kid actors, and he manages to get really good performances out of them. Especially, you feel the sort of sisterly bond between the Janice and Linda character, where they're two little girls in this orphanage who just want to get adopted together, and you're like, oh, these crazy kids gonna make it out. Spoilers, one of them doesn't. Yeah,
right. Well, and she does in a way.
I mean, in a way. But is it her at that point? Who knows?
No, it's definitely not. Yeah, no, it's so good, and it's paced so well. Like, to me, that's one thing I could say about this one in comparison to maybe The Conjuring 2 or even the third one. There was no sense of, like, okay, can we move this along for me in this one? Like, it was just nonstop. Building tension, payoff, build tension, payoff. It worked so well. It went by like a breeze. And it was, I mean, I'm sitting here in my house by myself. I'm a 40-year-old man almost, watching this movie last night, scaring the shit out of myself watching it. I got up, I paused it and got up and went and turned on my bedroom light. Because I'm like, man, if I go in there and there's fucking shadows in there, I'm not going to bed. like, it's so fucking... It's so effective. This is one of the most effective horror films I've personally seen in a long time.
I don't know if I would go that far. I would say it's one of the more effective big studio horror movies, I would say.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's more accurate. Yeah, that's more accurate.
Because I think you have Sandberg, who would come from like a smaller background doing like short films and stuff like that. And I think he gives this kind of like a smaller, grungier feel, despite the fact that it costs like $15 million. And I think it really helps out to like get you invested in the family, where like it does the classic thing that both the Conjuring movies do, and I think any great movie kind of does this to some degree, is what I call like the Scorsese shot, where there's one shot that gets you throughout like the entire layout of that bottom floor of the house, where you get exactly like, okay, here's this room, that room, here's, more importantly, I forgot what it's called, like the chair that goes up and down, what I call the Mrs. Deagle chair, unfortunately, because of Gremlins.
Yes.
But yeah, basically the automated chair that's able to go up the stairs for somebody who is not able to access the stairs. Which I think they also do a pretty good job of like selling the whole deal, because Janice has had polio, I believe, was the reason.
Yes.
Right, why, and she has a brace on her leg, and so and I like the fact that they play so much about like her not wanting to like be a burden, but how much that also hurts her at the same time, because she's a little kid who can't like go outside and play all the time. I really like how they handle that with her character.
Oh, definitely. Me too. And I just the way that she acts with the, the other little girl, where she's like, don't treat me any different, just go play. You don't have to stay in here, protect me. There's such a really good dynamic between those two that you really feel sort of the weight of it when everything starts really hitting the fan.
And also, it's not afraid to have her be the brunt of some horrible scares, particularly the whole sequence at night, where like she's trying to go up the stairs, and it's one of my favorite examples of like actually subverting the jump scare thing, where my favorite shot of the whole movie is her when like she's trying to go down the stairs in the chair and then stops and then accidentally goes back up, and she's like, oh my god, and the shot's constructed where she's on the left and there's blank blackness on the right. And you think, because you're trained and watch horror movies, like, oh, the monster's going to show up from the shadows, right? And she fucking lifts up. She, like, shoots up like a rocket. And you're like, what?
And then they also do another great subverting jump scare, to where they, they're showing the floor so long, and then the shoe falls, and you're like, oh, fuck, where is she? boom, there she is. Like they just dropped the pot.
She got dropped like she was like a fucking wrestler from a ladder.
Yes. And I mean, she hits solid, too. And you're like, oh, fuck. This is also another one of those movies to where you almost want to, like, grab a kid in some of these and shake them. Be like, what the fuck are you thinking? Don't. Like, when she's in that room, like, the very first time, when she goes into, spoiler alert, their daughter's room named B. I wonder why. Be Annabelle. But when she goes into the room and the scene with the fucking sheet, which is so good, where she covers down the sheet and all of a sudden the sheet stands up and is walking towards her, and when it falls, there's nothing there. I know they did that in the first one, I believe, the same sort of scare, but it's way more effective in this one. And she leaves and doesn't go back in the room. Why would you go back in that room again after that happened? You could not give me enough money to walk back into that room where, hey, I legit just saw a ghost that came after me. Nope, not going in there.
I think what the movie does a strong job of is like seeing that like that sequence unleashes the demon, and from there they really can't avoid the demon at that point. Also, could you really like stay at that house where like there's a demon anyway? No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't be able to. But the genius is they establish very firmly on like, look, we have nowhere to go.
We literally got nowhere to go. Yeah, if they kick us out, we're done. We got nothing.
Yeah. Which they do a really great job of establishing that, and also I think with like establishing that kind of issue with the girls. Like I love the scene where the sister Charlotte character, talks to the Janice character about like, look, really think about the other girls before you do it. This isn't gonna just affect you. This is gonna affect everybody. I think it's a stronger example of like how she is someone who's obviously of the faith, given she's a nun, but at the same time, it's not just about being like, oh, I'm a nun, and it's all about like respecting the Lord and all sorts of stuff. Right. It's more about just like actually raising this girl to like respect this house and these people.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You know, another one that I really thought was effective and great. It's hard to not just talk about the scares in this movie because they are plentiful and they're all well done. The one with Linda where she's got sort of that ray gun that shoots out the ball and you wheel it back in.
Yes.
Shoot it out the door and then it gets caught and it goes up into the air, you know. And she's just staring in the blackness, and you hear these short little footsteps. Boom, boom. And then all of a sudden, it's a dead-ass run. Whatever's coming to that room is booking its ass into that room now. And I'm like, oh, fuck. Even thinking about it right now, I got goosebumps. Because you can't even see it, but you know something's just fucking coming at you now. Like, it's coming after you. And God bless her, she does the classic little kid thing of get on the bed and hide under the blankets. That was so effective. Like, oh, fuck. Oh, God damn it. Like, I'm literally, oh no!
Or even one that involves like a bit of like actual like straight up effects work that I thought still really worked is when Anthony LaPaglia finally faces off against the Annabelle demon, and he's holding a cross up, and his fucking fingers are bent individually one by one over the other way. I'm like, ooh.
Oh, completely bad. Oh my god. And let's just get on to that too, Anthony LaPaglia. He's really good in this.
Yes.
And I really like that he's sort of, almost up until that scene, it's really the scene where he sits on the porch with Linda that you're like, oh no. But up until that, he's almost like a red herring character. Like, does he know what's going on? He's almost comes off like he could be a threat.
What I love about LaPaglia's performance is he has this very interesting middle ground between welcoming but introverted person and you're like actually a monster man. I don't know which you could be, and I think he does such a great job balancing it. Particularly the scene where like he walks by as the girls are like talking about like, oh, he's pretty cute, oh yeah, what about this guy, and then he's just like standing there in the hallway and they're like and then he leaves.
Yeah, you completely get why these kids are like, oh no, he's going to murder us.
Yeah, right. That's what makes that scene all the more terrifying on the porch, where it's just like, you went in that fucking closet? Like, oh god, wait, no. Oh no.
Stay away from that doll. I'm like, oh shit. And then he goes in the house and there it is, sitting at the fucking kitchen table. Like, oh boy. Yeah, great acting, great character. Miranda Otto was perfectly fine. She was fine in it. She was fun. Her comeuppance is brutal.
I have a lot of issue with that character, though. I think that's my weakest point with the movie, really, is that character. Because we mentioned so much about like how much interesting like depth and how much Anthony LaPaglia is able to play, and the Miranda Otto character is just kind of like, hey, I'm in my bedroom most of the time and I'm obscured, And it's also a weird thing where, like, after we had, like, the Janice character, now we have this other character who has, like, a disability of some sort, and she's just, like, put off to the side, and only whenever, like, we do get to see much of her, aside from the flashbacks, she's just an exposition machine, really.
Yeah, no, she definitely is, but, you know, unfortunately, in these type of movies, and it does suck, but there's always an exposition machine. It just sucks that it had to be her character. Like, it'd have been much better if it was like the priest or something. I definitely agree.
Or even if you balanced out like the character stuff and the exposition between her and the Pegley, as opposed to he got all the good character beats and she's mostly just an exposition machine. And is also treated as like this literal like monster. Like, she's literally a Phantom of the Opera because she has like a half mask and shit. Like, I don't know why we had to turn her into that.
Apparently, from what I understand, she was going to be like sort of the main antagonist of the last third of the movie,
right?
Where she would get possessed or whatever, and she'd be the one chasing her up the dumb waiter. Even though she kind of already did that, but still, it would definitely be her in the barn with the other girl and stuff like that. You know, in all honesty, I'm glad it didn't go that route either, because then it would have been even a little bit more offensive.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But they do just kind of like half her, and especially because I like the stuff they do with the Scarecrow. I think the Scarecrow is a really effective device where the Scarecrow isn't actually, like, that's a better example of how to do a conduit thing than Annabelle, where, like, literally the Scarecrow is just sitting there most of the time, looks kind of creepy, and you're like, something's going to happen with that Scarecrow. And then especially the shot where it comes to life, but more importantly, the demon rips out of the Scarecrow is so upsetting.
Oh yeah, for sure, dude. And then the whole light bulbs unscrewing thing, like, it's done so well. And you know, that's one thing about this movie too. Technically, none of the kids die. The orphan girls.
No, that's true.
Which you would expect, honestly, there to be a couple of them that would go. But yeah, they don't. None of them die. They all make it.
They put the kid killing on Front Street. And then don't do it with the rest of them. The demon does play the long game with the Janice character. Which I also want to really give credit to. Like, we talked about how lazy the interconnection thing was in The Nun. Versus, this is a great example of, like, David F. Sandberg said, like, oh, I don't want to do, like, a prequel or sequel or whatever, because I want something that kind of stands on its own. And this one mostly does, but the stuff they do integrate from the first Annabelle is so improved, like the demon character, or when they have the big tie-up at the end where Janice ends up being revealed, grows up into being the woman who had basically attacked everybody and was part of a satanic cult in the first Annabelle, which I thought was like kind of ingenious the way that they managed to tie that all up at the end of it.
I know, I agree. It almost made me want to go back and watch the first Annabelle after I finished it. And I was like, no, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. Thank God. But it almost did, because I agree. It's super fascinating. You're like, oh, it's had so many layers. And then I'm like, well, it's not going to matter because the whole movie is shit.
Yeah, those shout-outs also, they have, what's the gift that she's given by her adoptive parents? A Raggedy Ann doll. Hey!
But no, I really did thoroughly enjoy this movie. Like I said, I as soon as it was over, I watched the third, which I have a lot more problems with the third one than I do this one. The third one is still very effective, but this one is just pretty solid, man. It's a pretty solid horror film.
The third one has a lot more of a problem of, it's less of like an Annabelle 3 and more of like a Conjuring 2.5.
Yeah, and it really feels like, hey, which one of these is going to be the next spin-off?
Better not fucking be that werewolf. It better fucking not
be that goddamn werewolf, I swear to fucking God.
Coming soon, The Conjuring: werewolf.
God, werewolf? Werewolf.
The Conjuricles werewolf.
Oh, God.
But no, yeah, instead we got this, and with the Annabelle Creation, and I do agree, I think this one, it's such an improvement over the first one, and even with some of the stuff that's done in the third one or some of these other spin-offs, I think this is exactly how you take the task, the studio-mandated task of, we need another spin-off about a character who really, on paper, isn't that interesting with, like, the Annabelle doll. It's like, it's not that interesting a villain, especially in the context of, oh, she's just like a conduit for, like, other things. She doesn't really have any agency. She is still a plastic thing. And in this movie, they do a lot to, like, especially get you invested in, like, the creation of Annabelle. We didn't even talk about the whole backstory of how Annabelle is the conduit. I thought was, like, so well done. With the idea that, like, oh, they were praying to whatever deity could give them back their daughter. And they got, their daughter, but from a less than great source. And down to the sequence where they walk into her room, and they see her like sitting at the little table with the tea tray, and then her limbs extend and she becomes the demon. It's so upsetting.
Oh yeah, dude, and it's so well done. Because I've seen that trick obviously done in movies before too, but yeah, this one it's so creepy and weird, and like the way she's walking on the sides of her ankles, and you can like almost feel like the bones snapping and changing. Yeah, it's so creepy.
Yeah, and I was kind of starting final thoughts, so I'll just finalize my final thoughts by saying, yeah, Annabelle Creation is definitely the better one of these spin-offs. I would agree. I still say I prefer the first two Conjuring slightly more, but it's very neck and neck with 2. In particular, is like, oh, it could be the second of the Conjuring franchise or third, whatever. It still is very good, and I think especially does a really impressive job of taking very limited source material from the original movie and just making a really solid, engrossing horror movie with characters you care about. And it's also like a really great spotlight for David F. Sandberg is becoming fast after like this and Shazam. One of my favorite up-and-coming filmmakers, and I'm just like, great, dude, you're in Shazam too, but do some other shit. I'll see whatever the fuck you do. But yeah, Annabelle Creation, definitely one of the better examples, even not just of a spin-off, but a prequel. It's a really good prequel. They managed just to actually like tie everything together really well.
I agree with everything you just said. I think this is an incredibly solid horror film, very good spin-off. The first Conjuring to me is still the best of the Conjuring universe, but I would probably put this at number 2, and I mean right above Conjuring 2, and not by much, because I watched that again last night as well, and I thoroughly enjoyed this more. Maybe because it was a first-time watch, I'm not sure, but yeah, I think it's a really, really solid horror film that, unfortunately is saddled by being the second to the first Annabelle. I believe that's why maybe it doesn't get as much of the attention that it deserves. It does get a lot. There are a lot of fans of this, but I do know a lot of people who avoided it too because of how bad the first one was. I'm not saying that's unfair because I did the same thing, but this is, if you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth a watch, especially if, horror or the Conjuring movies are sort of your thing, then you can't go wrong with this one.
Yeah, or even if you've kind of been disturbed by like, oh my god, these Conjuring movies are just making too many of them. It's definitely, this and the first two Conjurings are the ones that I would recommend you see. Because even like at their most inoffensive, beyond like the crappy ones we talked about, you got like La Llorona, which is fine.
It's boring.
A movie that exists. I don't think it's like terrible, but I think it's just like, it's the most bland vanilla kind of version of like competency with this kind of setup that they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally watchable, but very forgettable, as opposed to you'll, like, hate yourself with the other ones. You're just like, whatever. It's like eating a cracker, watching La Llorona. Didn't help also a movie about, like, a Mexican legend that stars a bunch of white people and is made by white people. Doesn't also help with that. But, yeah, I would say definitely Annabelle Creation and the first two Conjurings are the way to go with this franchise.
Definitely.
But before we get to our next segment, here is a little message from the ESO crew that we very much fully endorse.
Welcome to Dr. Geek's Laboratory.
Hello everyone, Dr. Geek here with a shout out to all the scientists who worked tirelessly to bring a COVID-19 vaccine into reality. Let's face it, creating something of this magnitude is a miracle worthy of Dr. McCoy himself. And now, Dr. Geek needs you to do your part. Remember, each shot is one small step back to normal, one giant leap to putting the pandemic behind us. We can do this. For more information, visit vaccines.gov to find your nearest provider.
Alright, now it's time for the double review, where this is a segment where every week after we talk about our two movies, Am and I do a couple of recommendations and not so big recommendations for movies that are related to the topic that we're doing for the day. And we wanted to note that this is the first time we've done one of these with a franchise. Well, usually when we do these double redos, we don't want to like just reference the movies we either just talked about or have a bigger pool than, besides these two movies, what there's 5 other fucking movies to talk about in the Conjuring franchise. So for franchises, we're going to open up the selections to stuff that influenced these movies or has been influenced by them, that's followed, or just maybe from some of the people that are involved, that would make for a good compliment.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So I'll start with mine, because each of us have 2 good and 2 bad movies that we're recommending and then not so recommending, that make the good and bad double feature to complement. For me, the 2 that I picked were, one is clearly inspired, I think, a lot of the Conjuring movies, and one is one that came out post these movies, but I think adds a bit of a new, interesting cultural context to it. First, the one that came before, I am recommending Exorcist 3, which, if you don't know, is the third in the Exorcist movies. First Exorcist, great movie. Second one, you don't have to bother with, because 3 is mainly following up from the first film, and is made by William Peter Blatty, who wrote the original book, and wrote the screenplay for the original, and it follows the cop character that we had seen in the first movie, who now is played by George C. Scott, and is phenomenal in this movie. And it's a horror movie, but also feels very much more like a play, but yet doesn't seem uncinematic at all. It's weird to really describe, but it's following that character as he realizes there's this possessed character that he had once known that he's trying to get a demon out of, and there are so many great sequences of terror and jump scares, and more importantly, one of my favorite performances in any horror film is in this movie from Brad Dourif, who plays the possessed guy. And it's it's one of the great horror performances. It's such a phenomenal turn from him that I would recommend to anybody. That's on Tubi TV and Peacock if you want to watch that. And my other one is a more recent film that is on Netflix. It's a Netflix original, and it is called His House, which is a movie that's about a couple that moves from the southern Sudan. They're refugees, and they are in England. And they get this squatter kind of shitty house that's part of like this housing tenements. And as they find out, there is a ghost of some sort, and there's several ghosts. And I think it's a really great debut that has like so many creepy elements, but also feels very much of its own in like its cultural representation. I just thought it was a really like undersung movie from 2020 that I would recommend to anybody out there. See, that one's on Netflix. And then my 2 bad very quickly. One is the Poltergeist remake that came out in 2015. Feels like the antithetical version of this, especially where you can tell Poltergeist inspired these movies, and the Poltergeist remake is such a bland, dull example of how to poorly do a lot of this. It's not one of the worst remakes, but it's like the most forgettable Poltergeist movie, which is saying a lot when like there are worse movies like Poltergeist 3 involved, but that's still more memorable than this really bland, forgettable, awful remake. And then it's on Netflix, but I wouldn't recommend you watch it. Winchester, starring Helen Mirren from the Spirit Brothers, which I think is like the example of trying to recreate the style of The Conjuring, and especially with a cool, based on a true story idea of the Winchester house, which you don't know is a real house in England that's like was designed basically to contain ghosts and has so many different weird hallways and stuff. That house is so much more interesting than this dull, awful movie that wastes a lot of talented people, including the star Helen Mirren. It's really dull, really bad. Those are mine that I would like to mention.
Yeah, I agree with all of them. My 2 good ones are ones that I feel definitely influenced sort of the universe, and you just mentioned one of them. But I'd be hard pressed not to say it because of just it deals with, sort of paranormal researchers, and it is maybe the best haunted house movie ever made, and that is the original Poltergeist. Top to bottom, one of the best movies ever, and also has what I feel, in comparison to, as we mentioned with the Warrens, a great sort of adult married couple and their dynamic with each other and everything. It's phenomenal. There's nothing wrong with Poltergeist. And then my other choice, oddly enough, is another George C. Scott film, The Changeling, which is another one of the greatest haunted house movies ever made. It's so good. It's so good. And it's another sort of example of the ghosts maybe playing tricks on the person to maybe they're not who the guy thinks they are. Great look, great George C. Scott performance. The house alone is just a character. It's a beautiful, scary, awesome movie that isn't really mentioned a lot in the great circles of haunted house movies, and I think that's a huge disservice. I absolutely love The Changeling. The Changeling, by the way, is on Shudder if anybody has that. And my bad choices, one, The Boy, which is obviously it's a little doll and a creepy house and everything. It's so stupid. The first Boy movie it's just so ridiculous. Really, really, really dull. Really, really, really dumb. And then another one I picked is also a newer one that came out sort of post Conjuring sort of craziness. It's the one with Finn Wolfhard from It and Stranger Things. It's called The Turning. Another creepy kids in a house, blah blah blah. Is it haunted? It's also just a very dull, drab, dumb affair. I would avoid both of those unless you are struggling for a sleep aid and don't like taking any medicine to get there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with your good ones in particular. Poltergeist was one of the movies that got me into horror when I was younger, and I would also say that the Changeling is one I didn't really see until much more recently, and I really do dig. I think particularly there's one great, phenomenal, spooky scare with a ball going down the stairs. That's all I'll say. That's really chilling. And Scott does a great job of like leading both of like that and Exorcist 3. He really makes you believe in the horror that's there. I've seen The Boy. I haven't seen your other one. But The Boy is interesting to me in that it has a curious build-up that I thought was kind of intriguing about like the Lauren Cohen character kind of coming to grips with like, oh, this doll might be haunted, but maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing that the ghost of this boy is here. And then it takes a weird turn. I won't say what it is in the third act. It's just like, oh, what the fuck is this now? What?
It's so dumb.
It's very dumb. It's at least memorable, though. I'll give it that. I probably wouldn't remember the movie was more this other way, as opposed to it takes such an odd turn with its ending. And I'm guessing you didn't see Brahms the Boy 2, which is a great thing when you have your subtitle first. The title.
Avoided it like the plague.
That's our double review, as it were. And we actually wanted to share a brief thing in terms of the feedback, because this is in reference to our previous episode. James Rodriguez, friend of the show, had two things. One, he recommended a double bill for Paranormal Romance, based on last week, where he said, for a double bill, how about 2017's Thelma, as a girl's psychic abilities are an allegory for sexual repression, and 2013's Odd Thomas, a charming couple tries to stop the threat of murderous forces. I have not seen either of those. I've heard very good things about both, particularly Thelma.
I haven't seen Thelma either. I'm down to try it. And I wasn't big on Odd Thomas, man. I mean, I liked it enough, but I never felt sort of the romantic sort of connection between the two leads. And unfortunately, I think that's the point that you're supposed to. And to me, it just never clicked.
Plus, it just hurt you on a more personal level. Odd Thomas. I'm the Odd Thomas here.
Well, I mean, I am too a little bit. My last name. Come on, buddy. Don't count me
That's
out.
what I'm saying. I'm doing that from your perspective, watching Odd Thomas, because I haven't seen Odd Thomas.
I know what you're doing.
Oh, well, James also had another comment. With your new Godfather rule in place, I'm curious about what prior films you gladly would have vetoed. What previous pick would you have wanted to take the cannoli on? We did not mention the Godfather rule thing at all last episode, and I apologize. That completely slipped our mind when we were doing it. Basically, at the end of the show where we're going to do our picking, there is a new rule that was instituted a couple episodes ago where once someone says a choice, Adam and I have the option to do this once for the next year, to take the cannoli, which means to veto a choice that we hear. So Adam, in the far past, in the 3 years prior to introducing this rule, what movies would you have vetoed, especially hearing them immediately? You would have said, no, give me the other choice I haven't heard of.
Oogie Loves. Right off the bat. No question. And Country Bears were the first two that popped in there. Both of those I could do without. I could do without ever seeing them, and I'm mad that I did.
Interesting, keeping in mind that for both of those, the alternatives, because Country Bears was for our Disney Plus episode, we would have ended up with Kazam as the bad pick.
Well, I'd rather watch Kazam.
And then for the Cloris Leachman episode, where Oogie Loves was the bad choice, we would have ended up with the Beverly Hillbillies.
Also would have rather watched than Oogie Loves.
I would argue, though, at least with both of those made for much more interesting episodes than if we had done the other choices.
What about you? Do you pop in?
I had a couple that popped in, but these were more of ones that I believe I questioned at the time and would still question if you had brought them to my attention. For the Troubled Productions episode, we did 50 Shades of Grey, which I think at the time I questioned, and I think honestly was a pretty bad choice to do, because we didn't have a lot to say about 50 Shades of Grey. Though, to be fair, we would have ended up with The Lone Ranger as our alt pick. Which,
well, nowadays, no.
Well, I love, at the time, there was one problematic element of that, and now there's at least two problematic elements of that.
The leads.
Yes, right. As opposed to just one of the leads. That's like, oh no, both of them now.
Right.
And then the other one for the romantic comedies one, I think this would have just been because this was more of a technicality issue of Glitter. Glitter was the one that we ended up talking about. And I would have vetoed that just on like the technicality, like that's not a romantic comedy.
Hey man, that's what it's described as for some reason.
Though watching the movie, it's not a romantic comedy at all.
Not one bit.
As opposed to, we would have ended up with Gigli as the alternate pick, which might have been difficult just because I don't think that's even streaming anywhere. I think that movie's locked in a vault where it can never be seen again.
It's probably for the best.
Probably for the best, yes. But yeah, those are ones I probably would have vetoed myself. But it's time to start ending the show, Adam, because we got to thank some people like Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used in our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Christian Thor Lally for the artwork. Follow him on Twitter at Night of Water. That's night with a K _of_water. For more of his great art, there'll be a link in the description for him. And of course, we're going to thank our loyal patrons at patreon.com/DEDBpod, where every month you get to pick individual topics or movies we do for the show. And also you get bonus podcast stuff. And there's a lot going on over there on the Patreon. Because one, right now you can listen to our Westworld commentary. That was our bonus episode for May. Then later this week, you'll be able to hear, speaking of The Conjuring, we'll be doing an On the Edge of Relevance about The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, which will be on HBO Max. So we'll have a lot of fun discussing that on that Patreon exclusive show.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited about that one.
Yes, and then you can also vote in a poll this week, because we're going back to the world of Marvel soon, but not the MCU, not that shared universe. We're going to go to non-MCU Marvel movies, and you all get to pick between Adam's bad choices. And Adam, what are your two bad choices they can pick between?
Well, it's either Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, or X-Men Dark Phoenix. Both are terrible.
Very interesting. I've seen Dark Phoenix and confirm it's very terrible, but I have not seen either of those Tim Story Fantastic Four movies. I've avoided those.
That's probably for the best. They're both terrible.
True, but I don't know. That might be more reason for me to watch, because I can tell you right now, folks, I'm not sure how much we'll have to talk about Dark Phoenix. I think it's a bit of a wolf kind of affair as opposed to a fun one to talk about. And then also, just a thing, we've been doing the Patreon for about a year, but we haven't ever announced a Patreon goal, Adam. We haven't put goals for ourselves on the Patreon, but now we're comfortable enough, we're going to set our first Patreon goal, which will be up there, where when we get to 30 patrons, because as of now we have 15, we appreciate all 15 of you that donate, of course, thank you so much, but we want to expand some things, and we're going to make the statement that if we get to 30 patrons, we'll do a random drawing where one edgelord level patron, that's just the people who pay $1 a month, we will pick randomly one of them to choose a topic for us to do.
Yeah, and I mean, it could be anything. Well,
within reason.
No porn.
No porn, and I think we can firmly establish, nothing that we've done, multiple times over. Something we've done once, maybe, sure, but not something like DC or Marvel even. It's we've done those a lot.
Oh, no. Yeah, no.
Those are the ground rules. If we've done it more than once, and if it's porn, we're not going to do that as a topic.
Right. But other than that, I mean, you could get nuts with it.
Yeah, we could do something really interesting. And, so if we get to 30 patrons, whenever we do that, we will do that random drawing. And so, if you want to be one of those potential lucky few that might be able to do that, just go ahead and join up for just $1 a month. It really helps out.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We definitely appreciate it very, very much.
Yes. And for more of our antics, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at DEDBpod. You can also email us feedback, doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com. You can email us questions about the show or double redos of your own, like James did earlier, and we'll read it on the show for sure. And you can also help us out if you're not going to support us on the Patreon monthly. Why not just make one purchase of something at the TeePublic store for the ESO network? There'll be a link in the description for that, where you can buy all sorts of different merchandise with our logo on it, both our old logo and our new logo. with, mugs, t-shirts, tote bags, all sorts of stuff. You could just help us out, because we get a bit of a kickback from that. So we would recommend you do what, Adam?
Buy our merch. Buy our merch.
Oh, I love it when you say that, you little demon. You little demon in the corner.
I'm so fucking tired of it.
Oh no, the demon's coming back. But you can follow my own individual antics on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd as @NotTheWho'sTommy. And I also do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com and also film-cred.com.
I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Atom or Adam. That's ATOM_or_ADAM. And I'm on Letterboxd as well at Schwanson. That's SCHWANDTSON.
And for more of our antics here, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms. If you're listening on the ESO network, why not listen to all the other great shows on there? If you want the first 60 episodes we did or so before we joined ESO, why not dig into our Podbean main feed for all those? And if you can't support us monetarily by buying some merch or supporting us on the Patreon, we would recommend, if you can, just for totally free, rating, reviewing, or sharing the show around, because that gets us more visibility out there in the ghostly realms of the podcast universe.
And the thing is, it's not like there's any other movie podcasts out there.
No, not one.
So,
not one.
Not one. Not a single one. We are so unique. No, but yeah, just, we've been steadily climbing as far as listenership, and it's a great thing for us. It sort of boosts our confidence and, makes us feel like there's a reason why we're doing this. So if you can just share, that would be fantastic.
Yes, but now, Adam, it's time to do our picking for next week. And next week, we're going to the realm of talking about a specific actor once again, and this is one we've been wanting to do for a bit. A modern actor who's been doing a lot of great stuff. We have Kristen Stewart as our topic, who people have some issues with the Twilight movies. If you're still stuck in 2008. But she's really progressed and done a lot of great stuff in the last decade in particular.
Yeah, that's literally the only reason people don't like her is because of those damn Twilight movies. It's got to be, right?
Yeah, and the weird sort of publicity thing around those movies too, which I don't even want to go into. There's a lot of weird stuff with that. But we like covering at least one notable LGBTQ plus actor, filmmaker during Pride Month in June, and Kristen Stewart's a pretty solid one to do. So, and the thing is, Adam, usually we both have two choices, and you pick a good or bad one, and I do the same. But the thing is, for this, the patrons, patreon.com/GDBpod, they voted between two choices for my good Kristen Stewart pick, between Underwater, which ultimately won, and Personal Shopper, which didn't win. Kind of bummed, but at the same time, Underwater is a lot of fun stuff to talk about. So we already have that good pick locked. You can't veto that.
And I'm totally stoked on it, because I love Underwater.
We'll be talking a lot about that. And as I mentioned before, the Godfather rule is in effect, at least for your bad choices, where you'll have those two between, you've signed each of those two bad choices, number between 1 and 10. And I have the option when I pick a number between 1 and 10, and you say, oh, this is the choice we end up picking, to potentially veto it by saying, actually, I'll take the cannoli per the Godfather rule. So, Adam, for your two bad choices, I'm going to pick number 8.
All right, at number 10, I have a reboot that nobody asked for and nobody wanted. I have the Elizabeth Banks directed Charlie's Angels.
Okay, I have not seen that one. Most of the non-toxic word I've heard on that is just, it's fine.
I don't agree with that.
Okay, well, we'll definitely, you know what, I am not going to take the cannoli on this, because I'm curious to actually watch this, but what was your alternative choice?
At number 1, I had American Ultra, which I think is an atrocious film.
Okay, look, Underwater, we're going to already be talking about one controversial figure that's involved. I'm glad I don't have to talk about Max Landis. So,
yeah,
I'm
that's true.
good without
that's
doing
true.
that. All right.
Yep.
All right, so Underwater and the Charlie's Angels remake, 2 of her more Hollywood movies, and 2 that were very recent in her career, so it'll be very interesting to talk about. But until then, Adam, it's time that, we got all our ghost stuff prepared to go into this house and make sure it's clean. And there's no Annabelle dolls or nuns or crooked men or werewolves, right?
Yeah. Tiptoe through the tulips.
Excuse me, that's Insidious, sir.
I know, but it fits because it's terrifying.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.